In 1899, there's a photograph that keeps resurfacing in archives and re-uploads. A half-finished stone building dominates the frame. The walls are already up. The arches are already cut. The windows are uniform as if they came from a template. In front of it, the workers look small, not because the camera is far away, but because the structure is large in a way that feels immediate. What's unsettling isn't the size by itself. It's the timeline written next to it in the caption. A start date, completion date, and a span that seems too short for what the photo shows. If the caption is accurate, then either the work moved at a speed that doesn't fit the tools we associate with 1899, or the building in the picture wasn't starting from nothing. And the caption doesn't explain which one it is. The official explanation is simple and familiar. Late 1800s construction surged because of industrial progress. Steam power, rail transport, brickworks, prefabricated pieces, large crews, companies competing for civic contracts. That explanation accounts for some things, but not this. In case after case, the most complex elements appear early. The stone detailing is already there before the site looks organized. The symmetry is too consistent for a rush job, yet the dates suggest it was rushed. What's missing here is the middle stage, the part where the chaos should be visible. The scaffolding, the temporary supports, the unevenness you'd expect when speed is the priority. To understand the problem, you have to put a human next to the object. Not a number on a blueprint, just a person on a ladder. In many of these buildings tied to 1899 reports and civic expansions, the doorways are tall enough to feel oversized, but still shaped like real doors, not ceremonial arches. Staircases rise wide and shallow, as if built for heavy foot traffic, or for moving large objects upward without sharp angles. Basement windows sit half-buried, suggesting either the ground rose after construction, or the building sank, or the lower level was meant to be there from the start. None of that is impossible. It just raises a question. Why do so many of these features look functional, not symbolic? And why do they appear in buildings that were supposedly erected quickly and cheaply? Now imagine the tools. In 1899, you can point to cranes, but they were limited. You can point to steam shovels, but they weren't everywhere. You can point to stone carving, but it was slow and skilled, and the skilled labor pool was not infinite. Yet in photos and descriptions, you see blocks fitted with tight seams, curved masonry that sits clean, as if set by a routine, ornamentation repeated across long facades, like a copied pattern. It suggests organization. It suggests templates. It suggests that whatever process produced these parts wasn't improvised on site. And if that's true, then the speed story shifts. The question becomes whether the speed came from labor intensity or from an existing method we no longer account for when we picture 1899. Once you notice it in one place, it becomes harder to ignore elsewhere. Similar buildings appear across distant cities with similar proportions. Heavy stone bases, tall windows, domes, repeated arches, long corridors. The style is often labeled with broad terms, Beaux-Arts, neoclassical, civic monumental, but the label doesn't explain the repetition of specific engineering choices. It also doesn't explain why so many of these buildings look older than their supposed birth date, even in their earliest photographs. Sometimes the stones appear weathered. Sometimes the ground line is already high against the lower walls. Sometimes there are no visible piles of waste material around the site, even though a major excavation should leave a scar of debris. What happens next is where the story gets quieter and stranger. When you look for the paper trail, surveys, contractor logs, cost breakdowns, engineering diagrams, you do find some, but often it's thin compared to the size of the project. There are grand announcements, funding votes, ceremonial openings. Then fewer details about how the work was actually executed. In some municipal records, the language is vague. Improvements, renovations, expansion, restoration. Those words can mean anything, and they matter because they blur the line between building something new and reworking something already there. If a structure existed earlier, even partially, then the speed and scale would make more sense. But the records rarely pause to clarify that possibility. Maps deepen the unease. Older maps sometimes show large footprints where later histories claim open land. Then later maps simplify those same areas, as if the detail wasn't needed anymore. Fire insurance maps can show interior layouts that feel too advanced for temporary civic growth. But even those sources can be inconsistent from one edition to the next. What's missing here is continuity. Not proof of anything, just the steady, boring documentation you expect when a city builds something enormous. Instead, you often find a jump, before nothing, after a finished monumental building. The middle is a fog. Around 1899, the fog thickens in a particular way. You begin to see more before and after language, and less step-by-step evidence. A building is described as completed in a season, yet the finished photos show elaborate stonework, heavy roof lines, and uniform ornamentation across long elevations. Then, not long after, the narrative changes again. The same building becomes a remodeled older structure, or a replacement, or a reconstruction after damage. The disappearance event isn't always a single date. It's a shift in how the story is told. The records don't stop entirely. They just stop describing the same kind of thing with the same clarity. And then there are the reset moments: fairs, fires, modernization campaigns, street regrading, infrastructure upgrades. The official story frames these as progress. That explanation accounts for some things, but not this. After these moments, earlier photographic angles become rare. Earlier layouts are harder to find. Lower levels get sealed or repurposed. Entrances are moved. Basements become sub-basements. Windows disappear behind sidewalks. It suggests the city changing, but it also suggests something being adjusted to fit the new ground truth, literally. If the lower levels were always meant to be basements, why do so many of them have the proportions of occupied floors? The uncomfortable questions start to stack slowly. If these projects were truly built at record speed in 1899, where are the mountains of material removed from foundations? Where are the staging yards full of cut stone waiting to be set? Why do the earliest images so often show clean sites and finished details instead of messy work? If the explanation is large crews, then why do the photos show so few workers relative to the scale? If the explanation is industrial fabrication, then where are the catalogs and standard part records that would match the repeated design elements across cities? If the explanation is they were just copying European styles, why do the engineering choices repeat too, not just the decoration? Another question is quieter, but harder to shake. Who were these buildings for exactly at the moment they appear? Some seem oversized compared to the population they served at the time. Some are constructed with a confidence that assumes long-term stability, yet their early years are often described as temporary solutions, provisional halls, short-lived exhibition buildings, rapidly repurposed facilities. That contradiction is small on paper, but large in reality. Monumental architecture usually signals permanence. Temporary civic need usually produces something simpler. So why does the timeline keep pairing urgent with massive? If you stay with the archives long enough, the label Tartarian starts to appear in modern discussions, almost like a placeholder for a missing chapter. But even without that label, the underlying pattern remains. Buildings that look older than their dates, construction timelines that feel compressed, documentation that thins right where it should thicken, and urban changes that bury or reshape the lower parts of these structures after the fact. None of it forces a single conclusion. It just makes the standard picture of 1899 feel incomplete, as if a key step has been edited out, not with a red pen, but with silence. And maybe that's the real anomaly. Not that something impossible happened, but that so many things that should be easy to verify are oddly difficult to pin down. A building can be photographed, measured, visited, but the story of how it arrived there can dissolve into vague phrases, missing diagrams, shifting map details, and timelines that never quite match what the stone appears to show. If these were the fastest, largest civic projects of their era, the question is simple. Why do they leave behind monuments you can touch, but a construction process you can barely trace? If you've noticed similar buildings or similar gaps, you can leave what you found in the comments. And if you want to stay with this investigation, you can like and subscribe quietly so we can keep comparing notes.